This is a 3D printed prototype of a part that I plan to machine out of tool steel. Today I'm going to show you how I used Fusion 360 to plan the order of operations and make sure that I actually have a way to hang on to it for each step. Welcome back to Cloud 42. I'm James. This plastic collet is just a 3D printed prototype of a part that I am planning to make out of tool steel. And what this is an adapter to mount my inter-rapid indicator, which has a 4mm shank, into my Noga flex arm, which has a 3/8 inch hole. Now it also has a dovetail that I could mount with, but the inter-rapid indicator has a dovetail on the front. It has one on the back, but it doesn't have one on the top end. It just has this 4mm shank. Now, some indicator holders actually have a bore in the end. So through this split joint, you actually can put in a 4mm shank indicator, but this one doesn't, and there's not enough meat for me to actually put one in, I don't think, though that would be an interesting project as well. So the plan is I'm going to make a collet to go in this hole. So the collet just goes into the indicator holder like this, and then the shank of the indicator goes into that. Tighten that down, and we can hold the indicator in this holder. Now the plastic part works, right? So I just 3D printed it, and I've got a little collet in there, and it works. But it doesn't lock crisply. It's kind of mushy, just because of the flexibility of the plastic and the compressibility of the plastic, so I want to make one out of steel. Now machining this part is going to be a little bit tricky. I'll just start with a 3/8 inch drill rod, which I have in stock, and drill and ream a hole through it, and then make some cuts with a slitting saw. But as you can see, there's really very little to hang on to because the slitting saw cuts have to go through the part from both ends, and they go almost all the way through. So it's clear we're going to have to actually add some material to the end of the part that we can hang on to while we're machining it, and then cut it away as the machining progresses. But we need to cut it away soon enough that we can reach all the features we need to machine, but not so soon that we end up in a situation where we can't hold on to it for one of the operations. So let's go in the computer, and I will show you how I use the timeline in Fusion 360 to plan out a sequence of operations like this. This is the 3D model of the collet. I have this here in Fusion 360. And as you can see, it's a relatively complex part. We've got cuts coming in from both ends of the cylinder. We've got the cylinder itself, we've got a reamed hole in the center, and then we've got cuts coming in from both sides. And just as it sits, if we start with a piece of stock the same size as the collet, there's really no effective way to hold on to it because the cuts go almost all the way through the part from both ends. So what we're going to need to do is to actually mill this out of a larger piece of stock. So when we make this set of cuts coming in from the right-hand side shown in this view, we need a way to hold on to it, and we can have stock sticking out in this view, the left-hand end, to actually be able to hang on to it. And vice versa, when we make the cuts in from this side, we can hang on to the extra stock on the other side. Now we also have to remove that stock at some point, and exactly when we do that will affect whether we have what we need when we need it to be able to do the machining, and also whether the tools like the slitting saw are going to have enough cut depth to actually reach the proper depth of cut with that extra stock on there. So let's start a new model, and let's model this up and see if we can make this work. Now we're starting from an empty design here, and I would like to use parameters because I anticipate that I'm going to need to make a bunch of adjustments to this as we go. So let me go here to modify, change parameters, and let's add a few parameters. So the collet length, I want to make this about a 1/2 inch, and we'll see if that ends up being right. We're also going to need some grip stock on the end. Grip stock, and I'm going to set this to, let's start with 3/8 of an inch, 0.375. That's just a guess. It's going to be 375 diameter, so it's probably going to be 375 should be enough to grip it securely. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and put the diameter in here. That's 3/8 of an inch. Now we need a couple more things. The web thickness on the end of the collet, the part that's not cut. Web thickness, I'm going to set that initially to 1/8 of an inch. We'll see if that works. And then we also need the saw thickness. And the saw that I would like to use is a 1mm saw or a 40 thousandths. Set that to 040. And that should give us the basic parameters that we need. Now, I think the easiest way to model this is going to be to set up a series of construction planes. So let me go ahead and just set up a plane. And then let's space some planes off of this. So we'll take that as one end of the part. And let's construct an offset plane that is the collet length away from that. So there's our 1/2 inch. Now inside of those, we're going to have outside of that, we're going to need our stock. So let's add our grip stock on the outside of that one. And let's construct one on the other end with our, let's say, minus grip stock. And so the collet will be between these two planes, and then outside of those, the part will extend out to where the ends of the grip stock. Now let me put in some planes inside for the actual web thickness on the end. So I'll grab the end of the collet here, construct an offset plane. We'll pull this out, the web thickness, and then off of this plane, let's pull that out, minus web thickness. And then that will give us the actual structure that we need to model this up. So the collet will be between this plane, and then the stock will extend all the way out to the ends. Now that we have our planes, let's just model up the piece of stock that we want to use. So let's start with this plane on this end, and let's just create a sketch, and we'll spin around and look at that. Now we're going to want the stock is a cylinder, so we'll just draw a circle here, D for dimension, and put the diameter on that as the dimension. So there's our overall dimension, and now we will just right click, say extrude. We'll pull this out, and instead of distance, we'll select to object, and we'll go to this end plane down here. And that is our stock. Make sure all of our planes are still on here so we can see that. Okay, and then the first operation that we want to perform on that is to drill and ream a hole in it. So I'll go ahead and just say hole. We'll put it on this surface, snap that to the center, and the diameter of that hole is going to be 4mm. And we want to go ahead and just run that all the way through the stock. Okay, so that's our first operation, is to just drill and bore, or drill and ream the hole through the center. So the outside is the outside diameter of the collet, and the inside is the inside diameter of the collet. Okay, the next thing we need to do is actually make the cuts to make the slots in the collet. And since the collet is going to be, again, between this plane and this plane, we basically need to cut in from one end to the inner plane that defines the end of the web thickness. But of course we have to cut all the way from the end of the stock. So let me just right click on the end here. Let's create a sketch, and let's sketch in the slots that we need. Now I'm going to go up here to create rectangle, and we're going to use the center rectangle for this. So I'll center it on the center of the part, and I'll just pull this out and create a couple of rectangles to represent those slots. Hit D for dimension, and the width of this needs to be the saw thickness on each of these. And then how long they need to be, I want them to come out to the edge of the circle, so I'll just select the circle and that line and hit tangent. Now I could also just stretch them out so that they're longer than the part, and then we wouldn't have any trouble, but this will make it stick if we come back later and actually, for example, change the diameter. Okay, so I finish that. We'll select these regions. I'm holding Control so that I can select, come on, So I can select multiples, right click, say extrude, and we need to cut these in, and I want to cut to this plane. So instead of distance, we'll say to object, select that plane, and there now we have our slots in. Now we can start to analyze the order of operations here. So we made those cuts from this end, and you can see we have a nice solid piece of stock over here on the other end that we can hang on to. We can put that in a collet block. The rest of this will stick out, and we'll have the ability to cut those slots, and we have something to grip onto. But now that we've actually made those, we don't actually need the stock on this end anymore. At least I don't think we do. We're going to work through that order and make sure that's true. So I can right click here, say extrude, and I can extrude this back, distance to object, to this plane which defines the end of the collet. And now we have the slots on this end, and now we've removed the stock that we were hanging onto in order to cut those slots. Now to actually cut that off, we can saw most of it, but we're going to want to face this in the lathe. And in order to do that, we're going to grip the part by the other end here. Now, this other end, of course, that's going to be hard to do because this will collapse if we put it in a collet. So what we'll actually want to do that operation is put a pin in here. So let me just sketch that. It isn't necessary. This part I usually don't actually sketch into the model, but we're going to need a 4mm pin. So D for dimension, 4mm, and extrude that in. And it really doesn't matter how far in, as long as it doesn't go to where we're going to cut. And instead of join, we'll just make that a new component. Okay, so there's a pin, so we'll slide a pin into this end. We'll grip this end of the part in the collet, and then we will use that hold to then machine off this end of the extra stock. I'll just label this pin so that I can take it out when I don't need it. Okay, now that we've got this end cut off, the next thing we need to do is actually make the slots in from this end. And we'll be able to hang on to the other end here just the way we did. We'll hang on to this end of the part. The pin is in there so it won't collapse, so we should be able to put that in a collet and use our grip stock to hang on to it while we cut in from this end. So let me put a sketch on here. And we can do essentially the same thing with the rectangles here, with the center rectangles. It's a little trickier though because they need to be at an angle, and by default the center rectangles come in aligned with the axes. So let me put our dimensions on here the same way. Saw thickness. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same trick with the tangency. Select the circle, select the line, click tangent, and bring those in. Now the problem that I have is these are at the wrong angle. Escape to cancel the tangency. And if we come down here at the bottom and look, you can see there is a horizontal vertical constraint. That's what's keeping this thing vertical. So I'll click on that, hit delete, and the same thing is going on up here. There's a constraint right here, and I will just click on that, click delete. And now that I've done that, let me get rid of this plane, just hide it. Now that I've done that, I can grab these points and I can rotate these. And I want them at 45 degrees. So I'll hit L for line, X for construction, and I will just draw a vertical construction line here. Now I can hit D for dimension, and I can dimension the angle between these two lines. Make that 45 degrees. Do the same thing on the other side. And now we have our slots sketched in. At this point, I don't need to show this plane either, so let me hide that. And so then I can come in here, hold Control to multi-select, right-click Extrude, and we're going to cut that in, and we'll say Distance to Object, and we'll select the plane that we put in here for that purpose. Okay. Okay, so now we have cut in from this end, and we've actually made our slots. and we have grip stock down here to hang on to. We've still got the pin in there, so we have the ability to grip that in a collet. And we've formed now this end. Now, I'm not going to put the chamfers on here just yet, because ultimately this is going to turn into a shop drawing. And if the chamfers are on there, it's going to be a real pain to get the dimensions on the drawing. Okay, then the last thing we need to do here is actually remove the grip stock from the other end. Now we've got the pin in here, so and obviously this is just figurative, just so that I can kind of keep track of what's going on here in my head. We can slide that down to this end, or if I want to use an actual ground pin and not a sacrificial one that gets cut, I'll slide it down here so that it's out of the way. And then we need to machine off this end. Probably cut it with a saw first, and then come in here and actually face it. But for this, I'll just extrude, and we will just go distance to object and go to the end of the part. And then we pull out our pin, and there we have the actual collet. And I'm going to go ahead and hide my construction planes here so we can look at the part itself. Now at this point, if I want to come in here and actually put some chamfers on it, now would be an appropriate time. And I'll actually put these chamfers on probably while I'm performing the other operations. As soon as I face it, I'll go ahead and chamfer it. But again, I want this at the end of the timeline so that I have it in a suitable place for making drawings. And let's say we're going to put in 10 thou. Yeah, 10 thou looks pretty good. So there's our part. And then when we actually make the drawing from this, we can just roll the history marker back one, take those off so we have nice square corners. But now the interesting question is, are we able to make all these cuts? So let's take the history marker and we can roll this back. So the first thing we need to do is make this part. That's easy. That's just facing off a piece of drill rod, putting the hole in. How long is that? We're going to go from here to here. That's 1 1/4 inches. I should be able to drill 1 1/4 inches and ream it. Worst case, I'll drill from each side and then run the reamer through to straighten it all out. So that I can reach easily. Next question is this first set of cuts. Now I have a 40 thou thick 1 millimeter slitting saw that can reach about 3/4 inch, about 750 thou. How deep is this cut? And that cut is 750 thou. That is going to be tough. So I think we're going to have a hard time going that far. I think we need to take off some of the grip stock. So I can go up here and modify my parameters. And we had 375 thou. Let's change that to 350. And then that leaves us a collet that looks kind of like this. We've got just slightly less grip stock, but that should be okay because we can actually grip out a little bit further. So do we have a cut now that we can actually make? Let's make sure. 725. I can make a 725 deep cut with a saw that'll reach 750. Now I do have a larger saw, so we could potentially just use the larger saw, but it's thicker. So we can go modify the parameters here and see that's instead of 40 thou, it's 51 thou thick, but it can easily go deeper. But when I do that, we can see, looking at the interior here, that makes this web that's actually clamping on the stem of the indicator, that makes that pretty narrow. And any slight misalignment or wandering of the saw could cut that down and actually cut away that edge. So I don't really think that's a good option. So let me change that back to 040. Go back to the 1 millimeter saw. Yeah, and that leaves a little bit more meat there inside the collet. I'm happier with that. Okay, so we were back here and we were just analyzing this cut, and we can make that. Okay, and that was the pin. Okay, and then cutting off the other end, of course, that's fine. And we've got plenty of stock here to hang on to put that in a collet. Now to make the cuts from this end, these ones are much shallower, so that shouldn't be a challenge at all. Yeah, that's only 375 thou deep. So that looks fine. And then there's plenty of stock on the other end to grip here. We can check for sure to see how much. Yeah, 475 thou. And we'll want to pull back, 25, 50 thou from this end. So we're still, have 400 thou to grip. That should be no problem. And then the machining from this end, also no problem. Now, looking at this, I think that web thickness is just a little bit thicker. If this is going to be tool steel, I think what I have is W1. I feel like maybe this isn't going to be enough flexibility. I would like to make the web thickness a little bit thinner. So we'll go back in here, change the web thickness to say maybe 100 thou instead. And then just looking at this, I like that better. But of course, we may have changed our order of operations here so that it's not going to work. So how deep is this cut now? Let's inspect that from here to here. And we're back up to 750 thou, which again is the absolute limit of my slitting saw. So let's go change the parameters again. And let's lower the grip stock to say 325. Now does that get us so that this will fit? Yeah, 725. So I've got 750 thou saw. I'll have 25 thou clearance off of the end of this part to the arbor. That should be acceptable. And when we get to the end, we'll have a part that has a thin enough web that feels pretty good. The only question is, since we reduced that, the actual length of the grip stock, are we still going to have enough for all of the operations? And so here's the one cut. How much grip stock is here? Because it's not just the grip stock, it's also the web thickness, 425. I'm happy with that. That should be plenty to grip. And then when we take that off, of course, we've got all of this to grip. And then when we make the cuts from this end, on this end with the pin in there, we'll still have, yeah, the same 425. So we can grab 400 of this and make that cut. And that cut, of course, is only 400 thou deep. So that should be just fine. And pull out the pin. And again, I'm still deciding. I'll play around with this with the setup. I may just use a ground gauge pin because this is going to be a smooth reamed surface. It's going to be grabbed in a collet. And as long as I can keep it pulled back out of the way, it should not be a problem in terms of the pin getting damaged. But if it looks risky at all, I'll just turn a pin to 4 millimeters. As I said earlier, I was doing the planning to make this collet, and I thought the design process might be something interesting to show on its own. I will be making this part in a future video, so stay tuned for that. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, please give it a thumbs up. Feel free to subscribe to the channel and leave me a comment. I'd like to know what you think. Thank you for watching.